I believe I can. Perfect.
Thanks, Annie. We're gonna get started at right at 12:30 to give folks, as folks continue to trickle in, and I'm still waiting for, I think, one more important person to be in this room, Rika. So feel free to take a break if you need it and get some water, do what you need to do.
Jessica, good to see you again, by the way.
Good to see you again, too. It's our annual discussion of natural infrastructure and workforce development.
Oh, because it's 2024 now, yes.
we always seem to, it's my favorite topic to talk about with Landforks.
I'm still getting used to the year, and I was just about to say, no, this is our second time this year.
Right. It's a brand new year, yeah.
You're technically correct, yes.
Hey, Rika.
Hi, Jessica.
Good. We have all the important people here. I would say we'll start right at 12:30 to give folks the max time to join. So you got 2 minutes left if you need to stretch or get water or take a break. Jeff, thanks for joining.
It's like a cool workshop.
Yes, I'm biased, but this is probably the coolest session of the day.
I think you're right. Yes.
Oh, I was mute. I said they canceled the schools today in Cincinnati because of the cold. So if there are some kids running into the room, I apologize in advance.
That's all right. Yes, I feel your pain. It was a snow day for me, and daycare was closed yesterday, and we had a 2-hour delay this morning. DC gets 3 to 5 inches of snow when we shut down. We're not a great city at dealing with snow. But I see it's 12:30, so maybe in the interest of time, we can go ahead and get started because I'm very much looking forward to learning and discussing with all of you. So my name is Jessica Arians. I'm with the National Wildlife Federation based in Washington, D.C., and I am the Senior Program Manager for Climate and Energy Policy. NWF and myself have the great pleasure of working with ReImagine Appalachia since the coalition started a number of years ago on a variety of issues. And I grew up outside Cincinnati and have family roots in sort of northern Kentucky and Eastern Ohio. So love participating in this coalition and love talking about Appalachia and how important the region is and what we can do together. So this session is on natural infrastructure and workforce development. And we're going to talk about how they can work together for new job opportunities that help respond to the climate crisis and create pathways for workers. So I will be facilitating this session. Kate, who is on the call, will be doing a wonderful job note-taking and recording. Thank you, Kate. And then we'll hear from some great, from Rika about a great resource she's working on, some examples of great programs we can look to for examples, and then to turn it to a discussion. So just to kind of kick off and set the scene for kind of the focus area of this session. As you heard from the lovely and inspiring keynote this morning, as Joanne kind of laid out, there are many significant new federal resources available for climate and clean energy in general, but including to support natural infrastructure projects in particular. And so ReImagine Appalachia, and I know many of you and other partners are really thinking about how do we create the structure and support necessary to ensure this funding is used responsibly, is used equitably, it gets to the communities and people that could benefit from it the most. And we're going to focus on that in the natural infrastructure context. And Rika will talk, I think, a little bit more about what that term is. You may have heard natural infrastructure, green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, all similar-ish terms with overlapping definitions. At NWF, We refer to it as natural or nature mimicking systems that provide essential services and benefits to society. So think of things like flood protection, erosion control, wildlife habitat, clean air, clean water, outdoor recreation opportunities, mental health improvements, right? Like all these amazing co-benefits to society. And from where I sit as someone who works on climate policy, really important climate mitigation and climate resilience benefits. So there's a bunch of federal investments to support natural infrastructure projects. How do we make sure this work in natural infrastructure? That can look like reforesting minelands or installing a rain garden or restoring stream banks. How do we make sure that work also connects to all the amazing workforce development kind of lessons and opportunities that we've talked about at the summit yesterday and today? How do we make sure those jobs are good jobs? They pay family sustaining wages, they're local. And of particular importance for Appalachia, how do we make sure the folks who can get those jobs, how do we create new opportunities? So we're not leaving workers who are maybe left out of the economy, workers in communities who have hit hard by the opioid crisis, who have been caught up in the criminal justice system. How can we make sure as we're building this kind of new green economy that we're opening it up to all workers? And so that'll be kind of the focus of the discussion today. So we're going to first hear from Rika, who's a researcher with ReImagine Appalachia, about a paper that she's been working on targeted hire programs in natural infrastructure that I think is coming out this summer, that it will be hopefully a really amazing resource for communities and for the federal government and hopefully state governments too on this issue. And then we're going to hear from a couple of programs that provide this kind of holistic workforce training that we can look to as great examples of this work and maybe think about how they can be scaled up. And then hopefully leave the bulk of the time for discussion. We have some questions for this group around what you're paying attention to, what kind of lessons you want to share, what role ReImagine can play in an initiative like this. So that's how the next hour is going to go. And in the interest of time, I will shut up and turn it over to Rika to talk about her paper. And I will ask you, we don't have time to have everyone introduce themselves in the call, but if you don't mind introducing yourself in the chat, that would be wonderful. We'll save the chat after this session. So all of those resources and links and introductions will be saved. So Rika, I'll turn it over to you, please.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. So my name is Rika Rothenstein. I work as a researcher for 1 year now with ReImagine Appalachia, and I'm currently working on a policy brief about workforce development opportunities in natural infrastructure. And yeah, we have a little bit of a more time pressure on me. It will be released in mid-March, March 14th. There's a webinar, I think at noon, so you can mark the date for that. Yeah, so why do we focus on natural infrastructure? Natural infrastructure does offer solutions to mitigate climate change. Climate change in Appalachia, two pressing issues here are floods and extreme heat, what we are experiencing. And natural infrastructure can offer solutions there, right? You can have reforestation issue or reforestation efforts, that's good for carbon absorption, but also to mitigate runoffs that cause those floods. You can have floodplains, stuff like that, that help mitigate the effect of a flood. And another one is extreme heat. It's also an issue based on climate change in the Appalachian region, especially in urban areas, especially in low-income communities. And there also natural infrastructure solutions can help mitigate those effects. You have trees to provide shade, you have more green space that can help make those neighborhoods more livable and also, again, mitigate the effect of climate change. And then what we also have with natural infrastructure is we have increased federal spending, like Jessica said. So we have increased spending through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And I do talk in my research paper about those funding programs you have. I'm happy to learn from you all what the funds you're interested in, what do you want to learn about, what's out there. But yeah, we can use those funds to reforest the land, to plant more trees, yeah, to have good natural infrastructure solutions for the issues we have, environmental issues we have in Appalachia. So the work needs to be done. So there we come to the workforce development aspect of the whole thing. And we want to make sure that there, as Jessica said, good jobs, family sustaining wages, and not just seasonal work and exploitative work. And yeah, we want to make sure that those jobs help the communities there, help the people who live there, and provide them with a good career. And also what I'm focusing on in my paper is specifically to help people that have significant barriers to employment. So in Appalachia, we have the opioid epidemic. You have the coal industry that left, and we have a higher unemployment rate. So those are all people that need jobs, that want to stay in their communities. And we want to see, or I want to explore in the paper, what programs there are or that could be created to help those people get those good jobs in the natural infrastructure sector. And the examples I use in the paper are 3 organizations, or I focus on, and I'm sure there are more, but there is Green Forest Work. They do reforestation efforts on degraded minelands. Unfortunately, Chris Barton was somebody we contacted. He couldn't be here today. But that's one effort. There's lots of funding, or there's funding for reforestation initiatives. And I think what I would like to see, or what I think is a match, a great match, would be those workforce development programs that are also out there with those reforestation efforts, and connect good work programs with reforestation efforts to help with climate change, to have good natural infrastructure initiatives with jobs that can lead to a good family sustaining career. The other 2 organizations I'm discussing in the paper are in Pittsburgh. It's Land Force in Pittsburgh and the Trade Institute of Pittsburgh. And there we have people here. We have Kaylee Decado, Thomas Guntner from Land Force, and we have Maggie Baldocos. And so they are doing great work for workforce development work for people with significant barriers to employment. Land Force does that in the natural infrastructure sector, and the Trade Institute, based on the name, does it more in the trades. And I want to pass it over. I think it's Thomas from Land Force who will talk a little bit about Land Force, and then it'll go to Maggie. And yeah, and I'm happy to learn from you all what you would like to see in a paper from ReImagine, and how we can inform that work. Thank you. So I think I'll pass to Thomas.
Thank you, Wright. Appreciate that. I'm Thomas Gettner. I'm the Director of Land Stewardship at Land Force here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We are a 501c3 nonprofit employment social enterprise program. So we exist to fill 2 niches. One is to provide employment opportunities and training for adults that would otherwise have a harder time entering the workforce, and then also to service the environmental needs of our area. So we hire adults with barriers that could be anywhere from being previously incarcerated, lower levels of education, chronic homelessness, drug and alcohol addiction issues, and then basic eligibility for federal subsidies. So once someone self-certifies that they have a need for our program through our recruitment partners, and we work with a lot of probation offices, community groups, word of mouth really helps us out now that we are in our going into our 9th season. So former crew members telling their friends, apply for a job at Land Force. It's been really, really great for recruitment. But we're also doing things like putting up flyers at bus stops and at grocery stores and in libraries. And so once someone comes through our recruitment channels, they go through our application process, which includes a working interview. It includes going to a library and coming back with a book that's relevant to your career interests. Once we go through all that, we have an 8-week training program where we do a lot of certificate level trainings like OSHA and HAZWOP or 40, first aid CPR, a chainsaw safety class, the National Green Infrastructure Certification Program. And then on our workforce development side, we have things as our restorative practices certificate and a few other things that we go through on the workforce development side that equip people with the soft skills that they're going to need to marry with the hard skills that we have on the land stewardship side. Our 8 weeks of training then culminates in a graduation process where we're hiring the best people out of that class that want to continue with us, and they work on our contract year. Our contracts are normally focused around things like trail building and trail maintenance work, green infrastructure maintenance work. Sometimes we do some green infrastructure installation. With the Inflation Reduction Act, we're going to be doing a lot of tree care over the next 5 years, and that's going to include planting, pruning, checking cages, all the sort of maintenance things that happen in the life cycle of a tree. And we also focus a lot on vacant lot management. So that can be either cutting the grass or vegetation back on a vacant lot, helping remove some dump sites, or constructing a community garden out of it, creating a play space out of community gardens. We've also started to work in some other avenues. This past year, we worked on a city staircase project. If anyone is familiar with the Pittsburgh area, we've got a lot of dead-end streets that are too steep to have a street, so they just turn into staircases. And those staircases are also part of our infrastructure that helped workers that lived on top of the hills get down to the mills that were down in the river valleys. So a lot of these staircases, which are very unique, have gone into a state of dilapidation. So by focusing our efforts on re-beautifying the staircase corridor, planting trees, repainting hand railings, things like that, we're making it much more invitable for people to be multimodal about the way they move throughout their neighborhood for education, worship, work, all sorts of things. And so working on different avenues where land stewardship is still meaningful to the contribution, but isn't necessarily the focus of what the work is, has been a great success in having community buy-in and crew members feeling like they have a sense of ownership over the infrastructure here in Pittsburgh. So throughout the past 8 years, we're looking at an average of about a 90% success rate in placing people with jobs that pay an average of about $19 an hour. So when someone goes through our program, they successfully complete the training and successfully complete that season, they're leaving for good paying jobs and sticking with those jobs. We have an alumni group that offers support for people that after they've graduated, if they need a little bit extra resource sharing or anything that we can provide, we have an alumni group that helps address that. And so we're looking at ways to integrate seamlessly our crew members that are graduating directly into that alumni group so they can be part of that information sharing. We are looking at launching an apprenticeship program here soon. And we are looking at a second line of business that would be wood reuse. So from seed to slab, we are looking at how we are going to leverage those IRA funds into planting trees and maintaining them all the way through the life cycle, where a street facing tree in a public park might come down from a storm. Normally it would be mulched, and that releases all of the carbon. So by taking that tree in, we might be able to mill it, kiln it, and put it out to market for resale, or silo some of our operations to make some timbers for split rail fences or box steps, one of the common structures we use for trail work. So that's a little overview of where we are headed, what we are currently doing, and how we apply those skills around our region to meet two different needs, and that's an employment-based need and an environmental need as well. I think that pretty much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Thomas. Appreciate always wonderful to hear about the great work Landforce is doing. And I think what continues to stick out to me is like the holistic approach you take to like moving these people into the workforce and just the amazing success. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why we're so glad you're here is I think there are these great examples of programs that have been operating really successfully. And how can we take, not necessarily, scale up and make Landforce everywhere, but how can we take the best things of Landforce that are applicable everywhere and make sure folks, we make sure those lessons learned are shared. So another great program, we're going to turn it now to another great example of Maggie from TIP, I think, to talk a little bit about her organization and kind of how they approach workforce development and the populations they reach. So Maggie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. And this is wild because I can actually see Land Forces building from where I sit in my office, and yet it takes this
Same.
summit of multiple states coming together for me to still learn more about what Land Force offers. And they're just an incredible model for being, flexible to emerging needs of the region, and big fans. So glad to be here with them today. So TIP is also very similar in that we've been around for about 10 years, serving our most vulnerable neighbors. We're in the Homewood community of Pittsburgh, which is historically and primarily African-American. We are a masonry and bricklaying and carpentry program, also tuition free. About 80% of our participants have been previously incarcerated. About 60% are struggling with a substance use disorder. Nearly 30% are experiencing homelessness. 50% have a high school diploma or a GED, and 92% come to us without a driver's license. So you can see, unlike a lot of training providers, we have a very low bar for entry. We want our most vulnerable neighbors to come to the Trade Institute, and then we connect them with jobs once the 11-week carpentry or 7-week carpentry and 11-week masonry programs have completed. Despite kind of these barriers that our students are facing, we have a strong model. So over the past 10 years, we've graduated 700 men and women from our program. Last year, we hit unprecedented numbers. 91 students graduated. We had a 98% placement rate at $19.40 an hour. And for the first time ever, a 0% recidivism rate. So we're proud of that. And I think a big part of that comes because of our staff and the holistic approach we take. So we're kind of a thinly veiled social service agency, if I'm going to be honest. It kind of looks like a trade school, a traditional trade school, but half of our resources and staff are on the student service support side. So we have a life coach who leads a gratitude circle every morning. We have a case manager, another life coach who does one-on-one sessions with each student per week. And in the past 3 years, I would say, with the beginning of COVID and on, we've seen a real sharp rise of acute mental health issues among our students. So we are getting ready to hire a licensed social work to handle those more significant cases. So if someone is experiencing like suicidal thoughts, or maybe undiagnosed ADHD, we see all of that all the time. So we are constantly trying to expand that social support side, because it's really getting people ready to work. I've had many conversations with employers who say, we don't want experienced workers. We want to do the training. We want people who are ready to work. They are going to be consistently showing up on time, can communicate, and be open to learning. That's what employers want. And so that's what we are trying to model here at the Trade Institute. We partnered with Carnegie Mellon and Department of Human Services last year on a longitudinal study to look at what are the long-term effects of this program on our graduates versus those who don't graduate. And success meaning reliance on social service supports, returning to incarceration, and consistent employment. And what we found is that about 80% of our graduates are doing significantly better than those who don't graduate, but there is a small percentage, just under 20%, who are not doing well, who are going into drug and alcohol treatment, reincarceration, that kind of thing. So in response to that study, in November, we launched a social enterprise kind of transitional jobs program, similar to Land Force. We are hiring those students who have not kind of overcome the barriers in their lives in the 11 weeks to 18 weeks that they're with us. So we are hiring them, paying them a living wage, and on a case-by-case basis. Someone might stay for a month until they get their driver's license or deal with some legal issues. Someone might stay for a year. And so we're excited by that program. Always looking to expand and be flexible. We say to our employer partners, it's not about the carpentry program or the trade program itself, but it's about living wage middle class pathways. So if a solar panel installer were to come to us and say, we would hire 60 of your men and women next year, we would create a training program to meet that need. So it's much more about the dignity and the holistic approach to our students than about, the connection to the trade per se. And Pittsburgh, if you're familiar, is notoriously segregated in the workforce. And a lot of folks talk about how there's sort of two Pittsburghs happening in parallel, those that are kind of making the best places to live lists, and that's a real reality for them, and then everyone else. And so as this emerging green economy is coming our way, we want to make sure that our students are getting a piece of it. So that's why I'm here today, and I'm excited to learn more from others on this in this room.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Again, so wonderful to hear about the amazing work TIP is doing. And I think that last piece you mentioned, I think I want to elevate again about, it's not about the particulars of the training or the connection to the trade, right? Like, why I'm so glad you're here. It's that living wage middle class pathways. And I think we've talked about that. I think some of the sessions yesterday touched on that in manufacturing. We just want to touch on that in the natural infrastructure space, right? Like it's not necessarily, there's this amazing opportunity in the natural infrastructure space, and folks working on that, people in this workforce development, like how do we build some bridges there? So as those jobs are being created, like we're opening up those pathways to people that could really benefit from it. So yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. We're going to turn to our discussion now, unless Rika, you have any kind of other high-level remarks you want to add from your research or questions you think we should ask Thomas or Maggie.
I think we have top of the head. I don't
Great.
have anything. So.
Okay. Well, I think Rika and I are going to do a little tag team on this discussion, and happy to kind of like let it flow where it goes. But I'm first curious, we highlighted Landforce and TIP here. I would love if there are other folks representative of other organizations you think that are doing workforce development or natural infrastructure work, or some combination of the two in the Appalachia region that are represented on the call. Just want to leave space if there are other kind of success stories you know of that would be great to include in the research paper that Rika is working on, or for ReImagine to connect with. Want to make space if anyone knows of a great success story or organization that we're not aware of. Yeah, Cassidy, I see your hand is raised.
Hi, yeah, I'm Cassidy Lord. I'm with the Appalachian Trail Landscape Partnership and the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. We do a lot of volunteer engagement around the trail, and we're always looking to, increase the diversity of the folks that we are engaging on the trail. We also have some community programs where we're working on economic development around outdoor recreation-based economies, especially looking towards extraction industries that are transitioning away and trying to find opportunities for economic revitalization. Damascus, Virginia is a fantastic example. They were a timber and iron mining community that now has 5 trails running through the community. And if you haven't been there, it's a fantastic vacation spot. So I just wanted to drop that plug, but I also wanted to mention that the Department of the Interior has some keystone initiatives that they're getting ready to implement in support of some federal connectivity guidance, as well as all of this IRA and BIL funding. And they have an Appalachia-specific keystone initiative that's really looking at remediation of mine lands in central and southern Appalachia. The coordinator for that group is Tim Purinton, Purinton. So they're in the active building stages for this initiative. So they're getting a lot of, partner feedback on how they can kind of create this group, really, like I said, around remediation of mining lands. So if that's relevant to any of you, I highly suggest looking up that group, especially as their work's developing and they're starting to develop some goals and outcomes and work plans and stuff like that.
That's great, Cassie. Thank you so much for sharing about the work that you're doing in that Department of Interior plug. That's a great one. I think I do have a question about what federal or state programs are y'all paying attention to? So that you already answered a question I was going to ask. Maybe, and we can turn to that unless folks have other. I see James, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I see in the chat you raised, we are working towards a success story, but have hurdles. That's okay. Hurdles are there. So if you do want to pipe up and share, but Colleen, your hand is up, please.
Hi, so I'm gonna add in a chat. Can you hear me?
No, we
Yes?
can.
Okay. Like chatting. So I'm gonna I keep doing that. So I'm trying to send in the chat a research project that I was engaged with before I started with DEP on green skills and community colleges. I did the case study on Eastern Kentucky, and I think probably one example that's probably worth exploring for your research project is the Housing Development Alliance in conjunction with the Hazard Community College and some of the drug courts did a really interesting project that basically engages folks that were formerly incarcerated that are in recovery to gain skills and get credentials. So it's one of the things that I highlighted in the Kentucky case study, but more broadly, I think the part one of the research project, whenever I figure out how to actually send it as opposed to continuing to put myself on mute, looks at more broadly about green skills and the need to address the language we use as green skills deserts or green learning opportunity deserts. Yeah. So I currently work with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, so based in Harrisburg. So what I'm working on now is helping to get clean energy resources to environmental justice communities. And I'll also include a link. So one of the things that we're doing within the Energy Programs Office of DEP is thinking about this workforce piece. And there's we actually just got a report done around energy efficiency and the needs that we're seeing in Pennsylvania in that regards. So anyway, good stuff. Go team.
Go team. Thanks, Colleen. Yeah, please do drop that link to the study when you figure it out, or feel free to I'll drop my email in the chat towards the end, but you can just also email it to me and we'll make sure it gets out with the notes or to this group, or however we can make that work. Yeah, so we have about a half hour left. I did want to ask about what federal, state, and local policies can help grow these kinds of initiatives, or kind of something that Cassidy mentioned, paying attention to this Department of Interior opportunity. So what policies can grow these initiatives, or what policies are you paying attention to, or investment opportunities are you paying attention to? Would love folks' thoughts about that. Existing policies or policy change that you're advocating for, so we can better build bridges between workforce development and natural infrastructure programs, or fund this kind of work, or investment kind of grant opportunities you're paying attention to. So that's a question for the group. But James, I see you have your hand raised, so I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say in reference to what I was saying earlier, I'm located in southern West Virginia, and we're on a ARC Inspire grant to build a single room occupancy permanent supportive housing project with a Pathways to Housing program to move people from homelessness to housing. One of the people that we're working with is another business that wants to hire people out of recovery as part of their recovery to work initiative. and of course, the federal government doesn't grant money to for-profit businesses. So I was talking to her about being a fiscal sponsor. But Appalachian Regional Commission is the only one doing recovery to work grant funding right now through Inspire, and I can only be the lead applicant on one application at a time. So that's leading to a hurdle in me funding that expansion of the project.
Got it. Thanks, James. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And I was just going to say, I was wondering if maybe we could apply through ReImagine for workforce development to kind of mitigate that hurdle.
Yeah, it's worth discussing more. I mean, ReImagine is usually doesn't apply for, has not really gone after specific federal grant opportunities. I think we try and serve as a convener of many, many different groups. And admittedly, I'm not familiar with what it takes to become a fiscal sponsor, but we could probably try and helpfully make some connections and maybe get some potential opportunities to you, and or raise this as a concern and issue to ARC and something they need to consider when kind of working on this space. So again, I'll drop my email in the chat, and maybe we can connect more offline, and I can try and find the right folks at ReImagine to talk to you, to talk with you.
I also wanted to mention the American Climate Corps that probably many of you have heard about. And so that's a program like the AmeriCorps program, essentially. I think they try to create job opportunities for 20,000 American youth. They have listening sessions going on right now. There was one yesterday evening with Pennsylvania Senator Cassidy. He was a speaker there, actually gave a shout out to Land Force. I don't know if the Land Force guys have seen that. But since that program is still in development, I also would be interested for people who might consider applying to a core initiative. How would you like to see that program created? What do you think it has to have in order to make it worthwhile for you? Maybe like one thing I can mention there too is they do say they try to get people from disadvantaged communities. They want to benefit disadvantaged communities. They want participants from disadvantaged communities. But there, I always think you have that nice goal there, but how do we make that happen? What are the services? What are the step-by-step things that need to happen to reach those peoples and have those peoples participate in those programs?
Jumping in here, I think you got to go where the audience is. Sometimes you have to, let me start over. Community connections, partnerships, community connections, more partnerships. When you think you've got enough partnerships and community connections, stop everything you're doing and then focus on building more community connections with more partnerships. And that's the name of the game. So find out like where that population is, what their service organization is, and make those inroads there. And then when you have those program participants in there, survey them almost relentlessly, and don't be afraid of the things that you're going to find, because those program participants will help you mold your curriculum and what you're doing, your outreach efforts, everything to better suit individuals like them. Doing that community-based partnership model all the way to using the people that you bring into your program as a way to have better information for future outreach efforts and for constructing your program in a way that meets those specific needs and goals of those clientele. I think that's what we've been trying to do at Land Force over the past 9 years. And our success kind of mirrors our ability to be agile and adaptable to different needs, different people's needs, and also the needs of the hiring partners that we're helping place people with.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, I think that's great I think a great lesson we want to flag for the federal government. I think to kind of underscore what Rika mentioned, this American Climate Corps program is still being rolled out by the Biden administration. So there is a kind of open opportunity to suggest how to do it the right way. Many different federal agencies are involved: Department of Labor, Department of Interior, NOAA, Department of Energy. It's not just in the natural infrastructure space. It's will hopefully support a broad range of jobs, including like in energy efficiency and clean energy. But I think what ReImagine is interested in is how can we make sure, like, as this big new initiative is being rolled out, that we're taking lessons from TIP, from Land Force, and we're bringing that workforce development angle and that holistic approach to all these new federal programs. A lot of it looks like AmeriCorps will be one of the big entities, federal agencies, like involved in shaping this new American Climate Corps, which is wonderful. But we want to make sure it's not just open to young people that are maybe like taking a year in between college or out of college, that it's open to all kinds of people, and especially people from underserved communities. So just to underscore, like, this American Climate Corps opportunity is an active opportunity, I think, to like push best practices with the Biden administration, and they seem to be open to it. So that's something ReImagine is exploring. And if you have thoughts about other best practices to share, want to be engaged in that process, would love to hear more. But I will, Kenneth, I see you have your hand up, so I will turn it over to you.
Just a quick rural, a lot of the disadvantaged children that you're speaking about and the disadvantaged clients that you're speaking about trying to reach, and how do you, when they cannot do you can't hear me.
We're breaking it in and out. I can kind of hear you. Maybe others can hear you better.
Okay, let me try again. All right, let me try again. How can we get the program access to the disadvantaged when transportation is one of the big problems, and access to the internet is also a key problem, especially in our area? The terrain limits cellular connection and internet connection. It's just not profitable. And what we find in survey after survey is they can't get to the jobs, they can't get to the programs because they access. It goes back to the one speaker said it's all about housing, jobs, and transportation and sobriety. Okay, transportation and housing. We have a lot of homeless kids in our area too, but a lot of it goes back to transportation first. How can we get that done first? And it looks like I've lost you.
Nope, we're still with you.
Okay, that was the end of my question, and my screen is going gonzo.
Okay, well, I'm glad you got it out, Kenneth. Thank you. Yeah, those are great questions. I don't necessarily have the answers. If other folks have thoughts, that those are certainly things that we're interested in raising when we're talking about this intersection of workforce development and natural infrastructure, is thinking of things like housing, transportation, and those can't be afterthoughts or tack-ons, right? Like, those are central to how we're doing this authentically, but others may have more insightful things to share.
Yeah, what I want to say, and I don't want to, we have those people here with Maggie and Thomas from TIP and Land Force, but Maggie mentioned, right, they help with driver's license education, which doesn't get you a car necessarily, but that is one step in that direction. So I think with the American Climate Corps, to talk to that, we would push for, or what I would give as a policy recommendation, is include funding for wraparound services for the people who want to do that work in natural infrastructure or work with the Climate Corps. So do have better, and I don't even know how you would do that in practice, but like, do have better access to transportation, do have social service when that's needed, do have housing for those people, or have funds so that can be provided for them, and have that attached to those to those workforce development programs the government is offering.
See, Jeff dropped in the chat a great resource on that from West Virginia. So yeah, this is the housing, transportation, childcare, the mental health services, which Maggie kind of mentioned, an increasing focus on that at TIP, right? Like that's something I think we're interested in elevating that. Certainly from my perspective, I work on federal policy. That's kind of the role I play in the ReImagine Appalachia Coalition, is elevating those considerations. Like, so as the American Climate Corps is being rolled out, we're not thinking of those as afterthoughts. Those are central to the program. But yeah, curious on the American Climate Corps, are there other, I think, things in that vein to raise, or are folks here aware or paying attention to or engaging with that program or opportunity at all? Or other state kind of policies and funding opportunities? To get back to a question I mentioned earlier, are there things you're paying attention to in this space that ReImagine should be aware of or can be useful in?
Jessica, could you give the question again?
Sure. So I'm curious on, I guess it was a two-part question. To get back to a question I asked earlier, we've talked, what federal, state, or local policies and initiatives can grow these what we're talking about here, this natural infrastructure and workforce development intersection? So are there things you're paying attention to in the states you work, in the communities you work in, or at the federal level that can help grow this kind of work? That would be useful for ReImagine to kind of know about and pay attention to. And then other question, this American Climate Corps opportunity, is anyone engaging in that in any way? Because that's something ReImagine is starting to dive more into, and would love to kind of know about other groups that are engaged and making sure we're kind of partnering there. So 2 questions for the room. However, if either of those questions are interesting for you, we have 15 minutes left. Please, raise what you think is relevant to this conversation and useful.
In West Virginia, we get a lot of flooding, for better or worse. And so this is, this mitigation of flooding is always a big topic. And there was I think at one point they were trying to put together a state mitigation plan for FEMA and other federal agencies. West Virginia VOAD, and there are VOADs in each state. I'm really interested in how some of these federal programs could integrate with folks like West Virginia VOAD who go out and do flood response and flood recovery. And often the recovery can, the 2016 flood was a 19 county flood. It is literally just finishing up this year. So there's sustainability capacity there, and I think trying to figure out how to reach to VOADs so that they are informed and can take advantage of these programs, would be a really, really good thing. It'd be interesting to do it sort of, maybe a regional meeting of the Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, Tennessee, and North Carolina and Virginia VOADs. But it would help build capacity not only for mitigating floods, but it also to have a workforce sort of ready, for any floods that come along. And that's the problem, because you build capacity during a flood, then when the flood's over, then you drop that capacity, then you just have to rebuild it again.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I think that's a great point. And I like that idea of a regional meeting of the VOADs. James, please go ahead.
So I said in the chat earlier, but I know we had talked a little bit about policy and stuff. I have some housing policy that's being sponsored in West Virginia this session, but I've been talking to legislators in Charleston, and transportation is something that that legislators are discussing in Charleston, and what to do about transportation. A lot of them are talking about how they can bill Medicaid for it, but I think that that's a big thing with transportation. How are you going to fund it?
Thank you, James. Good to hear it's a topic of conversation, but yeah, the funding is a perennial issue. Cassidy, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. There's just a couple things that popped to mind with all of these comments. One around the flooding issue. There is a community pilot program that the Thrive Regional Partnership in Chattanooga, Tennessee is initiating that is doing community flood resilience planning. And it's actually super cool because they're engaging a lot of people that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be engaged. So they're talking to EMS, they're talking to the firefighters, folks that, the first responders for those that are in floods. They've spoken with people who've been personally impacted by the floods. And they're really coming up with these flood management plans and climate resilience plans for these small communities. At this point, it's just in Southeast Tennessee and Northwest Georgia, but it's been super successful, and I anticipate that it's going to get some more traction and expand a little bit. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy has an emerging leaders program that we take youth, high school, post-high school, I think it's 35 and younger, and we're getting them out on the trail and getting them, skills around trail management and development. So I think programs like that, we're starting to see more and more of. Another one that came to mind is the AmeriCorps Vista program. I've used AmeriCorps Vista students in the past. I shouldn't even call them students. A lot of them are already out of school. And it's not necessarily a long-term position, but it gives them relevant experiences to then move on and get new jobs. So we just had one around our Appalachian Trail Communities program, and she leveraged that into a community economic development job in her local community. And then another thought that I had, and then I'll stop, is so this is kind of from a flip side around energy development from a trail perspective and conservation perspective. There are a ton of data centers that are being built in Middle East Virginia to support the DC hub. And the goal is to get all of the fiber optic connections to rural communities so that they have access to these data centers and to the resources that they offer. From a conservation perspective, we're looking at where transmission lines are being placed and how that affects a trail experience. But I think that there's going to be a lot of movement over the next couple of years around these data centers and getting internet access to folks in Appalachia who don't have that access now. So just a couple of things there.
Thank you so much, Cassie. Appreciate all of that. And I see, Shannon, thank you for the note in the chat about thinking about engaging with the Climate Corps and other AmeriCorps programs. And she dropped her link in the chat. So just noting that. John, please go ahead.
Yes, hello, everybody. John Burkhart. I work with the West Virginia DNR. I'm a botanist with the West Virginia DNR, and someone sent me a link to this meeting, and I was particularly interested in this session. I have kind of two topics I just wanted to bring up. First, Jeffrey brought up flood prevention and wetland mitigation. This is an area I see that there's a lot of opportunity. Our landscapes have been extensively modified, and this also interestingly interacts with agricultural lands, and that we have a lot of agricultural lands that are underutilized in the amount of economic activity that we could produce from them, like the highest quality floodplain farms are just hayed now. There's no real development of markets for a lot of agricultural products in our region. So I feel like Western, this is kind of an agricultural issue, is that we don't make a lot of value from our land, from our available agricultural lands. West Virginia is just kind of a historical, cultural artifact that we didn't, like California. The reason California has very valuable agricultural industries is because people joined together and they built networks of distributorships and vendors and skilled labor forces to work in those industries. West Virginia doesn't really have that. I mean, whenever I say stuff like that, there's always caveats and exceptions and people get offended. But relative, we don't have a very well-developed agricultural economy. We don't create as much value from our landscapes as we can. Possibilities there are like, just with those landscapes, they're not ameliorating flood risk as much as they could. They're also not creating as much agricultural value as they could. One or the other would be nice, right, for our people and the state's economy. So yeah, development of identifying flood risk areas is important, but also I think why I'm here, why I was interested in participating, and something I've thought about is finding the areas where restoration activity would have the greatest leverage, where the places in the state where we restore wetlands, riparian areas, upland landscapes, and watersheds, where we'll achieve the greatest effect at flood mitigation, disaster prevention, water quality, stuff like that. That's something I think is an important target, and something we could and just, floods are a very important economic, social sort of event that reflects how we're using the land. And I think you can motivate people to take better care of the land through floods. The second thing I wanted to bring up and why I was here is just, my work. I work with a lot of different partners. We work with the USDA NRCS programs. I work with a lot of different federal agencies, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, National Park Service. It's kind of just like a reflection of our, we don't have very clear pathways for people to become environmental stewards, to become skilled practitioners of stewardship and restoration. I feel like there's an unmet need, because I actually do think there's a lot of economic potential and workforce potential, but I don't think the technical education infrastructure has been thoroughly developed to help people learn how to steward lands. Most high school people can't identify an oak tree. They can't tell you what an acorn is and what type of tree makes an acorn. So we just don't have. And then, if a high school education isn't meeting those needs, which we could have BOCED programs in high school, then 2-year degrees and, trade school programs to help get people able to step into these workforce. Also, alternative pathways to incarcerated, formerly incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, stuff like that. But just like, it's hard. Those are hard things. Just like one little example, I know I'm using more. I was just like, this is my opportunity to share what I know, what I've been thinking about. Like West Virginia had a state tree nursery. It was staffed by female prisoners near I think it was in Cabell County or something like that. The state tree nursery. They during COVID, those inmates no longer weren't able to work at the state tree nursery, and then eventually the state tree nursery got shuttered. It's currently closed and defunct. That was the only operating bare root tree nursery in the state. We don't really have a good source for trees in West Virginia anymore at the industrial scale. You have to work with a private company. There's no like state tree nursery or federal tree nursery, so really serving the state. But that was being staffed by inmates, and I don't know how many of them went on to work in horticulture or anything like that. But there's so many. The needs for environmental restoration, landscape scale restoration are so great. And the number of people with the skills, the number of companies really operating in that environment, just the unmet need is so huge that I feel, we got to identify places to start. And I really think workforce development, specifically focusing on teaching people, like building curricula of landscape and stewardship, environmental stewardship, are really essential. Anyway, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I appreciate greatly you raising all of those points. And I feel like I want to respond to all of them. But in the interest of time, Colleen, I see you have your hand raised, and I know we only have a few minutes left.
Yeah, I mentioned this in the chat, but I do want to emphasize that I think there's a huge potential to address abandoned and orphan oil and gas wells.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've worked in environmental justice for 20 years, and I wasn't particularly familiar with the magnitude of the problem. And in Pennsylvania, the estimates, I mean, there's been 28,000 that have been identified, but there's estimates ranging from 200 to 700,000 in Pennsylvania alone. And, in terms of thinking about this piece around, I forget how this group is framed, but like the restoration piece, the job creation piece, the climate change impact piece. I mean, like if wells aren't producing and they're just, hanging out in the space, they're still contributing to climate change because there's huge methane and like other emissions that are coming from it. And you tie that in with like environmental health as well. I just think it's an under appreciated area of need and potential for remediation. So anyway, just wanted to flag that. Thanks.
And to tag on that, my understanding is it is a great job opportunity for people who did work in the fossil fuel industries, because a lot of the skills that they have are also applicable when plugging those wells. So hopefully that's something we can tap into.
Yeah, and I'll just drop a link in the chat. Thank you for that, Colleen. Our partners at the Ohio River Valley Institute have done some great work. This link looks very long, but hopefully it works. Like charting the scale of the orphan oil and gas well problem across Appalachia. So huge potential there. There's also a ton of money from the bipartisan infrastructure law that for plugging orphan oil and gas wells. So that's definitely something we're trying to thread the needle on as well, as similar to all the reclaimed mine land, like the AML money is making sure those jobs are good jobs. So Annie is reminding us we have 1 minute left. Rika just dropped her email in the chat. I will drop mine in the chat as well. Please reach out. I greatly appreciate kind of everyone's time in this discussion session today, particularly our presenters who shared a little bit about their work. This is an area I think over the next year, ReImagine is going to continue to think about what role the coalition can play at this intersection, engaging with the American Climate Corps, lifting up success stories and kind of trying to think about how to scale what works, and all of the good stuff we talked about today. So please reach out as you continue to think about this or want to engage with any of those things more. Signing up for the ReImagine newsletter is like a great way to kind of stay informed on what the coalition is doing, and webinars and events and other ways to get involved. But maybe Rika, any ending words before we let folks go?
Yeah, thank you for coming. And if you have more input regarding my paper, I'm all ears. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks everyone again for your time. And I think we'll see you back. There's a little debrief session in the main room. Thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your afternoons.
We can just leave the room then, or do we?
I think leave room and go back to the main room. I'm going to save the chat. Kate, thank you so much for probably epic note taking during this. Appreciate it very, very much.
All right, I'll see you in the main room.
Yeah, see you in the main room. Thanks, Rika.
Molly, can we share the long survey that is the Google Doc as well, as we move into these? Just really quickly. So we're about to go into some Mentimeter poll tape surveys to talk a little bit about what you learned today and what comes next. But before we do that, I did want to highlight that we do have a longer survey that is a Google document survey that you can fill out and learn a little bit more about our work. No worries if anyone has to jump early. So now we can move into the Mentimeter polls, Molly.
And you have the link for the chat, Dana, or do I need to grab that? If you put it in once, I can share it after that again. So while Dana's grabbing the link for this Mentimeter, you can also, if you see at the top of the screen, if you go to menti.com, you can just type that code in and it'll take you to the same survey, but we're going to do a couple
I figured
Mentimeter
it
work.
out.
You got
Sorry,
it.
I was having a total technology collapse. Hello. Does that link work? I was not emotionally prepared to put that link in the chat. All right, I'm ready now. Welcome back, everyone. So glad to have you all. So if you click on that link in the chat, we're doing another one of these polls, or you can drop your answer in the chat and we'll move it into the poll. But since today was focused on the idea of the stories we need to tell, and this one I believe can have longer answers, but you know, coming out of today,